Hi, boys and girls. Today's the day. We're going to finish the book, The Water Horse. Thanks for sticking with me through the entire book. The test is available on Renaissance Place. It's 15,000 words. And now that you've finished the book with me, well, you will in a little bit, you can watch the movie. It's available on Hoopla, which is a website or an app that you can access through the Bellevue Public Library page or just by going to Hoopla. All you need to do is type in your library card number, and then you can watch the movie. It's very different than the book. The setting feels slightly different. Some of the characters are different. There's a lot more complex issues happening in the movie than there is in the book. And there's some scary music and some darker scenes. So I hope you're not too afraid to watch it. I do think you'll enjoy it, though. So now I'm going to read chapter 10 called A Harebrained Plan. Now, harebrained means kind of wild. So let's see what their wild plan is. Christmas 1932 was a good one in the small white house on the cliff top, because for once, Father was at home. What's more, since his next voyage was to be a short one, he would have leave again at the end of March or maybe even the beginning of April. And by then, the water horse will be 3 years old. Isn't that right, he said? The children nodded. Heaven only knows how much bigger he's going to grow. I think it's about time we move him. We need to get him to a bigger location this spring, or he'll be likely to be too big to get moved at all. How can we move him, Father? Said Kirstie. By road, of course. What would we move him in? Well, what would you put a water horse in? A horse trailer, said Angus. Nope, not big enough, said Grumble. How about a moving van? Difficult, said Father. Moving vans are quite high off the ground. It would be very hard to load him into a van. You'd need a crane, like we use at the docks. Anyway, what would we do about the moving men? They'd be bound to see him, and the story would be out. No, it seems there's only one kind of vehicle suitable for the job. A cattle truck, said Mother. Exactly, honey. You've got it. They're just big enough. They're strong enough to carry about a dozen bulls. They're covered so he won't be seen on the journey. And they have a good long ramp to let down for him to scramble up. And one last thing. There's a wee door at the front end of the body, just behind the cab, so that whoever goes into the truck before Crusoe can lure him in with food. And then they can get out without getting squashed. Just one thing you've forgotten, said Grumble. What about the driver of this cattle truck? There's no way of keeping that thing a secret from him. There's no need, said Father. He knows already. The driver of the cattle truck will be me. One of his shipmates, Father had explained, had a brother who was a cattle herder, and he felt for sure he would rent it out. My pal tells me, said Father, that his brother is not the most honest man in Scotland. Now and again, apparently, one of his trucks might pick up a bunch of cattle from an outlying field on a dark night and put them in a different field 40 or 50 miles away. They're cattle rustlers, said Grumble. You mean to tell me you hang out with cattle rustlers? Mother looked worried. You mean you're planning to let this hauler think you want his truck to go cattle rustling? Father grinned. A nod and a wink and a little bit of extra cash. That'll get me the truck. I've got a clean driving license, and although I've never driven a truck, I expect I'll get the hang of it. Oh, Mother was not digging the idea at all. She opened her mouth to question such a crazy idea, but then she decided to shut it again. Just as she had been pleased to see Crusoe's departure from the goldfish pond to the loch, so now she realized she was glad to think that he would be going many miles away, out of their lives forever, perhaps. It was not the bore of the water horse. It was simply that it's been nearly 3 years, and he had occupied so much of everybody's time and demanded so much of them, constantly supplying him with sardines and herrings and chocolate chip cookies. Her children, she felt, had neglected their homework, and her father had done far less in the garden. And now her husband was proposing to remove the creature. Good, she thought. Said Grumble. I've never heard of such a harebrained plan. I wash my hands of it. I want nothing to do with it. Where are we going to take Crusoe? Asked Kirstie. It's got to be a really big loch, hasn't it? Said Angus. You're right, Angus. Get the map out of the drawer, will you? The one that is marked West Scotland. Let's look. Islay to Gairloch. And when Angus had gotten it, Father spread it out. Now then, first of all, we could always put him in a sea loch. We could also let him go there into Loch Mordart. Or, he'd be free to make his way anywhere into the world. No, no, the children cried. We'd never see him again. Please don't put him somewhere where he could go wherever he'd like. Well, then, it's one of these three, isn't it? Said Grumble. There's Loch Moor. That's the nearest sizable one to us. It's deep. Oh, so very deep. Maybe the water horse that was said to have lived there in the past when I was a boy is still there. Might be good company for him, said Grumble. Wait, though, said Father, looking at the map. See here? He could easily get down the river more to the sea. That's no good. If you children ever want to see him again, we don't want to give him access to the sea. Well, then how about Lake Lomond? That's big enough. Too far, said Father. I can't drive all that way. Well, that only leaves one choice, said Grumble, and he pointed to a long blue stretch of water that ran diagonally up to the northeast, 24 miles from one end to the next, and probably the deepest of them all. That's all the space he could ever want in life. You're right, said Father. That's where we'll take Crusoe. That's the loch for him. And it's not as long of a drive as all, let's say, the 30 miles to Fort William and another 30 to Fort Augustus. When he's living there, said Kirstie, will we be able to visit him sometime? I really would like to see him. Her voice sounded a bit shaky. Of course we will, said Father. We'll call him, and we'll give him a nice tickle every once in a while. Do you suppose other people might catch sight of him there, though? They could, I suppose, said Grumble. Now and again, if he's absent-minded, it could happen. Now let me show you the illustration of the family gathered around the map. I love Grumble's face in this one, and his crossed arms on his chest. He's certainly indicating that he's thinking hard and maybe not satisfied with this harebrained plan. What if he ever gets excited and near a hunting fish? Or he could bump a boat like he did Postie's. Let's just hope that he behaves himself. Even if a folk ever catches a glimpse of him, they're never going to be certain of exactly what they've seen. They'll think it's a log or a shadow, maybe some salmon leaping or otters playing on a dead stag floating among the waves. They'll never be quite sure. We are the only people who will ever know for certain that in the loch there lives the water horse. Do you think that's true? Do you think they're the only people that will ever know? I'm not sure. They think they're the only people. Chapter 11 is called A Ride in a Truck. When the time came, loading Crusoe was actually easy. There was a rough track that led down to the loch from the road, and Father had reversed the cattle truck along it, stopping just short of the water where the ground grew soggy. They don't want to get stuck, do they? Of course, Crusoe was there. He was there, but did not show any signs since he had not yet been called. Now, on that spring morning, it was April the 14th of 1933. Everything was ready. The children sat safely inside the cab of the truck, and Father and Grumble stood by the end of the lowered tail ramp. Mother stayed at home. She had provided a parting present, though, for the water horse, a gift of food to lure him into the loch so they could get him up the ramp, lure him out of the loch, up the ramp, and into the body of the truck. There had been much discussion about what this lure should be. Chocolate chip cookies? Herring? Or the very first food that had ever passed Crusoe's lips. Do you remember what that is? If you said sardines, you're right. Trouble is, said Father, that if I lay a trail of those, he's liable to find it difficult to pick them up off the ground. I think it may slow him even. We don't want to slow down the effort. What we need is something tasty that we can drag along in front of him, just out of his reach. Something long enough to keep me clear of accidentally becoming the meal myself. How about a string of sausages, said Mother. Great idea, hon, said Father, and he paused for a moment, looking and listening carefully. He could see no one and hear nothing, so he walked to the brink and called, Crusoe! And of course, Crusoe came surging in. Father and Grumble had feared that perhaps by now the water horse might be unwilling to leave the element in which he had grown to become accustomed. He lived there for 3 years. But their fears were unfounded. Father walked slowly backward, trailing the string of sausages, and Crusoe, with an action that looked kind of like a giant caterpillar, humped himself forward out of the water, over the intervening ground towards the cattle truck. Up the slanted ramp he hauled himself. And there's a picture of Crusoe leaving the loch to go to a much larger loch, one over 20 miles long. Boys and girls, that's like driving to Sandusky from Bellevue. That's a lot of length. We'll have plenty of room to swim. He put forth much effort to catch the end of the long sausage string. He put forth effort all the way up into the body of the truck. The springs creaked underneath his weight. Dropping the lure at the far end, Father nipped smartly out the little side door and ran around to the back. As Crusoe was wolfing down the sausages with much contentment, Father and Grumble each took hold of one side of the tail ramp, heaved it up, screwed the locking clamps tight, and the water horse was loaded into a massive cattle truck. The journey itself was very uneventful. Southward they went to Glenfinnan, then due east along the north shore of Loch Eel, till finally they came to Fort William. They stopped by the banks of Loch Lochy. Father was a little worried that the water horse might become uncomfortable, even dried out, so here they were about halfway through their journey. Grumble and him had filled buckets and sloshed the contents through the slits of the truck. Crusoe bellowed in appreciation. He enjoys the water very much. By the side of Loch Oik, they stopped again and repeated this. Kirstie and Angus got to get out at this stop and stretch their legs, while Father and Grumble filled the buckets again. Just as Father was about to toss in the last bucketful, they heard something. The noise of an approaching car. "Off the road, children," said Father. For the road was very narrow, and they all stood and waited for the vehicle to round the bend ahead. Tourists, they thought. But as it came closer, they noticed it was slowing to a halt. If you know what halt means, it means stop. "Quickly," said Father to Grumble, "lift the hood. Act as if something's wrong with the cattle truck." A lone police officer got out of the police car and said, "Are you in trouble?" "Yes, we are," thought Father, but he answered, No, we're not. Just going to top off the radiator with a little bit of fluid. Maybe a wee bit of a leak somewhere in there. She needs a drop of water now and again. So, boys and girls, cars have radiators, and if you pour water in them, it helps to keep the engine components cool. He started to unscrew the radiator cap gently, as though it were hot, to begin to lift the bucket of water. Fortunately, the policeman didn't watch closely, as Father already had a very full radiator and no engine problems. But he turned to Grumble and said, "Where are you bound?" "Fort Augustus," said Grumble. "A load of fat cattle for the slaughterhouse," he added, very untruthfully. "Your own stock?" said the policeman. The policeman must wonder if they're cattle rustlers. "Oh, aye," said Grumble, truthful once more. "This is our stock. You know, there's a good bit of rustling going on in these parts. Would you believe it?" said the policeman. "Never," said Grumble in an astonished voice. "Never would I believe that somebody would cattle rustle." "It's a fact," said the policeman. "People always take things that aren't theirs." He looked at the old man and the two small children. "Now, with these little kids here, I can't imagine that you're my idea of rustlers," he said, smiling at the kids. Then he put his eye to one of the slits in the side of the cattle truck. Right up close, he peeked in. Mercifully, he could see very little inside. Thank goodness. Crusoe's bulk occupied all of the available space. All he could do was make out a great dark flank of flesh pressed against the truck side. He poked it with a gloved finger, and Crusoe, thinking it to be a caress from his friends, gave a low bellow of pleasure. "Oh, you got a fine big beast in there," said the policeman. "A good size it must be, huh, laddie?" he said when he turned to Angus. "A monster," Angus said solemnly. The policeman laughed and ruffled Angus's hair. His father now joined them. Everybody started laughing. "You topped it off, have you?" said the policeman to Father. "Oh, yes, it's time for us to get going." "You better get that leak taken care of," said the police officer. Yes, we must be going, but we'll get that leak taken care of." "Well, I must be going too," said the policeman. And to their great relief, he did go. Whew, that was a close call. In the early afternoon, they reached Fort Augustus at the lower end of the great loch. A new road had recently been built along the shore, but Father chose to take the old southern road. He drove steadily, looking out all the while for a suitable place. Just short of doors, he found it. There was a rest area on the left, perched high above a steep, bushy slope. It fell directly into the loch, and here they stopped. Crusoe himself did not exactly enjoy the journey. At first, when the tail ramp slammed shut on him, it felt strange to be confined. He was not afraid. He did not know the meaning of fear, but he didn't care for the roar of the engine and the stink of the gas fumes and the bumping and the swaying motion of their progress. He started to feel a little bit sick. After a while, however, he became used to things, and indeed, because it was the time of day when he always took a nap, he began to feel quite drowsy. He had almost dropped off when the bumping and swaying had stopped and some water was splashed on him. Nice giants, he thought to himself, even though they aren't giants. And he gave a bellow of thanks. Then it was onward again, inside the strange cave that he was now living in. Because of his great size, he had hardly any room to move a muscle. And a little bit later, the bumping stopped again, and more water was thrown on him. Crusoe made a lowing sound in appreciation as someone prodded him. He felt quite cramped, and it was a relief when the roaring stopped and the jolting stopped and the door behind him swung down and let in some light. Painfully, though, because his limbs were cramped, Crusoe maneuvered himself backward and down the slope of the ramp and to the ground. It was pleasant to have tickling again from his two small giants. They each had found a stick and enthusiastically went to work on him. Then, as Crusoe squirmed pleasurably around, he suddenly saw beneath stretching away in either direction as far as the eye could see, an enormous expanse of water. Get into it, every instinct told him, and he heaved his huge body to the edge of the rest area and slithered over the edge and crashed down through the bushes onto the slope below. He fell with a mighty splash into the sun-dappled depths of the loch. When Crusoe had gone, they all stood silently staring out over the still springtime waters. Father felt pleasure and pride that the problem had been solved in a seaman-like manner. Grumble felt relief now that at last the great beastie was in a safe place where he needn't worry about him anymore. Kirstie was remembering the time when Crusoe was only as long as the span of Grumble's hand. 50 or 60 feet now, Grumble had said. Amazing that he was going to get that big. But she no longer doubted it. Angus was remembering that he had forgotten to bring any emergency supplies. Do you remember what emergency supplies are for Angus? Snacks, that's right. Cookies. For all of them, there was a sense of deep contentment that now the water horse had everything he could ever want. Forevermore, he would have the freedom of this great, deep, fish-filled loch, safe from every danger. He would be happy ever after, thought Kirstie, and because of that, so am I. Father looked at his watch. My, will you look at that? It's 5 to 3 already. We must be starting home, or we'll be late for that high tea Mother is getting ready for us. Blow me down, said Angus. That will never do. And they clambered onto the cattle truck and drove away. Down, 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 the water horse dived, scattering great schools of fish as he went into the cold, black depths. And then the water horse turned and shot upward, faster and faster, proud of his strength. For a moment, all his training was forgotten, and the giant's teaching that he must not show himself unless summoned was forgotten. He burst out into the sunshine in the middle of the loch and plunged and rolled on the surface, so happy he was to be in this wonderful new watery world. Then he came to his senses, and with a final great surge, he sank from sight. So here's a picture of that illustration of Crusoe celebrating that he is now in the largest loch. Chapter 12 is very short. I'll read it to you. Look how short it is. That's the whole chapter. From a local newspaper, the first reported sighting of the monster on April 14th, 1933 at 3 p.m. Mr. and Mrs. Mackey of Drummaket were driving along the new road on the northern shore of Loch Ness when they saw an enormous rolling and plunging animal, and it disappeared with a great upsurge of water. So, did anybody ever find Crusoe or see him? according to this newspaper article, he was sighted on April 14th. Now, if you enjoyed the story of the water horse, you might also enjoy the movie. This illustration is actually from the movie. So the front cover is from the movie. If you do choose to watch the movie, it can be a little bit scary. Some of the music in the beginning and some of the content right away when it starts makes you feel a little frightened for Angus. But if you stick with it, I think you'll enjoy the movie and find it to be quite different than the book. You have to have listened to the book to take the AR test. The movie won't cut it. Quite different. Boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed The Water Horse. Take care.